At 78 years old, David Letterman remains one of the most influential figures in television history, a pioneer of late-night comedy and a man whose wit shaped an entire generation of entertainers. For more than 3 decades, millions ended their nights with his sharp humor, awkward pauses, self-deprecating charm, and a style so distinct that it became the blueprint for everyone who followed. But behind the desk, behind the laughter, and behind the reputation of an unshakable comic giant, Letterman carried battles that most viewers never saw. His life story is not the tale of a flawless celebrity career. It is a story woven with anxiety, depression, public humiliation, health crises, and the heavy price of fame. Long before he became a household name, Letterman struggled with self-doubt so severe that even success felt temporary. And when he finally reached the top, he discovered that the spotlight had its own cruelty, an unforgiving glare that magnified every flaw and exposed every vulnerability. David Letterman built a career out of making others laugh, but privately he fought storms that were deeply painful and profoundly human. From his heart bypass surgery that nearly killed him, to the emotional collapse following his late-night retirement, to the scandal that shook his personal life and left him publicly shattered, Letterman's journey has been marked by moments that redefined him completely. At 78, his legacy is undeniable, but so are the scars he carries. This is the real story behind the legend. A story about the price of brilliance, the weight of fame, and the quiet tragedies that shaped the man behind the microphone. David Letterman's journey did not begin with the confidence and charisma he later displayed on television. Instead, it began in Indiana, in a quiet suburb where he often felt invisible, overshadowed, and misunderstood. Born in 1947 in Indianapolis, he grew up in a middle-class household where humor became both a shield and a means of survival. His father, Harry, a florist with a warm personality, was the first person to show young David the power of entertainment. Harry had an effortless charm, he could captivate a room, make strangers laugh, and turn ordinary moments into stories worth remembering. David admired him deeply, so deeply that it would shape the rest of his life. But tragedy struck early. When David was just 15, his father died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 57. The loss shattered him. It wasn't just grief, it was the first deep wound that would follow him throughout adulthood. He often described it as the moment his childhood ended. And it left behind a fear that would haunt him for decades, that he, too, was living on borrowed time. The insecurity that took root after his father's death became the foundation of his personality. David was smart, funny, and observant, but he was also introverted, anxious, and unsure of his own value. He worked odd jobs, attended college without a clear direction, and struggled to find a place where he truly fit. Humor became his outlet, and performance became the one space where he felt control. But even as he cracked jokes, he never quite believed in himself. These insecurities would follow him into adulthood, shaping how he worked, how he loved, and how he saw himself. And as he stepped into the world of broadcasting, they would become both his driving force and his silent tormentor. As David Letterman climbed his way through the world of broadcasting, from local radio to regional news, and eventually to national television, his insecurities didn't disappear. They evolved. What began as self-doubt became a relentless internal pressure to be perfect, to outperform everyone else, and to never let the cracks in his confidence show. By the 1980s, Letterman had emerged as a new kind of late-night host, sarcastic, unpredictable, self-aware, and brilliantly awkward. Viewers loved him. Critics adored him. And rivals watched him with increasing unease. But with success came an extraordinary level of pressure. Letterman obsessed over ratings, worried endlessly about every monologue, and often treated failure, real or imagined, as a personal catastrophe. Behind the scenes, he could be withdrawn, brooding, and consumed by anxiety. Colleagues respected him, but they also recognized the storm within him. The fame, the workload, the nightly expectation to entertain millions, every bit of it slowly eroded his sense of stability. Then, in 2009, came the scandal that would shake his world. A producer attempted to blackmail him by threatening to expose his past affairs with members of his staff. Instead of giving in, Letterman did something extraordinary. He went on national television and confessed everything, a raw, uncomfortable admission delivered in front of millions. The audience laughed at moments, unsure of what they were witnessing. But the reality was devastating. His marriage suffered. His reputation took a hit. And internally, he was crushed by guilt and humiliation. The scandal exposed the private battles he had kept hidden, his loneliness, his emotional isolation, and the deep flaws he had tried so hard to bury. For the first time, the world saw Letterman not as a comedian or a host, but as a deeply imperfect man struggling to hold himself together. The experience changed him permanently. The laughter continued on screen, but behind the scenes, he began confronting the pain he had long avoided. It was the beginning of a painful chapter, one that would ultimately shape the way he left late-night television and the man he would become in his later years. Even before scandal and public scrutiny reshaped David Letterman's life, another battle nearly ended it. In 2000, at the height of his career, Letterman began experiencing terrifying chest pains. What he thought was stress turned out to be far more serious. Doctors discovered an artery that was almost completely blocked. Within hours, he was rushed into emergency surgery for a quintuple bypass, a procedure that saved his life but left him shaken in ways he had never experienced. Letterman had always joked about his fear of mortality, but now it was real. The recovery was brutal, marked by physical weakness, emotional vulnerability, and a new awareness of just how fragile his life truly was. When he returned to his show weeks later, he opened with a raw honesty that shocked viewers. For once, the jokes stopped. The mask dropped. And the audience saw the man beneath the persona, a man who had nearly died and was no longer hiding how scared he had been. But surviving the surgery didn't erase the struggle. It triggered an ongoing battle with depression, one that Letterman has spoken about with striking openness. There were days when he felt hollow, disconnected, and unsure whether he could continue the nightly grind. Comedy had once been his armor, now it often felt like another burden. By the time he retired in 2015, the pressure, the scandals, and the emotional exhaustion had taken a toll far deeper than the public realized. His final episodes were celebrated as a triumphant farewell, but privately, Letterman descended into a profound emotional crash. The routine that had defined him for decades vanished overnight. The silence was overwhelming. For the first time in 33 years, he wasn't needed at 11:30 p.m. No cameras. No audience. No cue cards. Just quiet, a quiet that grew loud enough to swallow him whole. He struggled with identity, with purpose, and with a lingering sense that he had wasted years chasing perfection when what he needed most was peace. The beard he grew during this period, now a signature part of his post-retirement look, wasn't just a fashion choice. It was symbolic, a physical break from the person he had been for so long. This was David Letterman in his most vulnerable chapter, a man confronting himself without the safety net of fame. By the time David Letterman reached his late 70s, he was no longer the sharp-suited late-night warrior who dominated television for more than 3 decades. He was a man transformed, quieter, more thoughtful, and far more honest about the wounds he carried. And while fans celebrated his post-retirement reinvention, the truth behind the transformation was far more emotional and, at times, heartbreaking. Letterman spent much of his later years confronting the consequences of the choices he made earlier in life. His 2009 scandal left a lasting bruise, one he never fully brushed away. The guilt followed him for years, especially when discussing the impact it had on his wife, Regina Lasco, and their son, Harry. Letterman has admitted in interviews that he still battles shame, even long after the public moved on. It became one of the central emotional struggles of his older age, learning how to forgive himself. His departure from late-night television also forced him into an unfamiliar emotional space. For decades, he lived in the rhythm of constant work, writing jokes, interviewing celebrities, solving production crises. But once the cameras went dark, the lack of structure triggered a deep sense of disorientation. He has publicly shared that retirement brought waves of depression, self-doubt, and loneliness. Without his show, he felt disconnected from the world he once controlled with ease. Physically, aging added new limitations. His past heart problems meant he had to be cautious, and he often spoke about the creeping fear that his father's fate, dying young, might still be waiting for him. Even simple things, like long walks or public appearances, required more effort. The energy that once seemed infinite began to wane. And yet, through all this, Letterman found a form of redemption, not in fame, but in reflection. His Netflix series My Next Guest Needs No Introduction became a space where he could be himself without the comedy armor. He listened more, joked less, and embraced a level of vulnerability he never showed during the Late Show era. The guests weren't props for punchlines, they were partners in conversations that helped him rediscover meaning. He also embraced fatherhood in a way he never had time for during his career. With Harry, he finally allowed himself to be present, soft, and open-hearted, a change he often describes as one of the few things that saved him. At 78, the tragedy of David Letterman isn't defined by scandal or aging or the decline of fame. It's the emotional weight he carried for decades, the grief of losing his father young, the pressure of perfection, the loneliness behind the laughter, and the painful realization that success never healed the hidden wounds. But his greatest triumph is this: he learned to live with his imperfections, to speak openly about his struggles, and to embrace a quieter, more honest life. He may no longer sit behind the desk, but the man he has become, flawed, reflective, and deeply human, is far more compelling than the television legend the world once knew. David Letterman's story is not just one of tragedy. It is one of survival, growth, and the courage to face the parts of himself he once tried to hide.